Thanks very much. And thank you for all that the British Animal Studies Network has been and for its impact, which definitely will be ongoing. I feel comfortable coming over to these meetings. The tone and approach, I think, is really truly interdisciplinary, and that's quite rare, I think. It's quite radical, I think, as well. So, I was torn between two abstracts to submit to the call for this meeting. Over the winter, I've been living in a residential caravan, a park home, a very old and creaky one on the outskirts of Edinburgh. Most of that time with 3 dogs, a cat, and in the walls and roof spaces, 1 or more rats or mice. I can't make up my mind who they are or how many from the sounds of scuttling and nibbling, sometimes inches from my head when I'm lying in bed. The walls are thin, and at night the sounds somehow seem so much louder. So thanks to BASN, I've been carrying around this idea of neighbours for some time. Strangely, none of the other animals, one of whom my cairn terrier is a fully paid up member of the squirrel police, notice or react to these sounds in the walls and ceiling. There might be the occasional raised eyebrow, a particularly loud scuttle, usually followed by a sigh, a yawn, and then a return to sleep. And that's the cat as well, does that. And this is it. So this is where I've been staying, and I found that the entry point, I think, is just under the eave at the corner there. There's a part of the facing is being chewed away or has fallen off. And this is a sign that where I work at the vet school, it could of course be a sign anywhere, but what I can't stop thinking about when I see this sign, which I pass on a regular, almost daily basis, is that a few short steps away in a neighbouring building, individuals of the same genus are recipients to the full force of 21st century veterinary medicine, delivered by caring clinicians with animal welfare at the centre of all that they do. Rats, of course, are endearing companion animals, probably the friendliest of what the vets call the small furries, and adored by adults and children for their personalities and their characters. And this sort of juxtaposition astounds me, really. I can't get my head round it, but it's simply a pointed example, of course, of the ambiguity that surrounds all our dealing with animals. And as an example of what, for me, is kind of the central ethical dilemma of what it means to be a vet. In considering the main species for this paper, which isn't a rodent, I'm simply exploring the same things, I think, albeit at more of an extremity. Because sometimes in ethical discussion, going to the extremity to test out an idea can be quite helpful. So my subject are parasites, creatures living beside us, on us, or inside us, really about as close as you can get. Are they good neighbours or bad neighbours? That's the thing I want to talk about the next 15 minutes, but maybe also keeping rodents in the back of our minds too, because they're certainly always in the back of my mind just now. Each time I dispense one of these, I'm dispensing death for much smaller organisms than rats or mice, who are living a complex, interwoven life with their host, the animal patient, standing or sitting in front of me. Very often, the parasites targeted aren't causing disease. Rather, the antiparasitic, the drug is given as a preventative, frequently as part of a health plan for the companion animal concerned, which will also include things like annual vaccinations and periodic health checks. The drugs used in these kind of preventative approaches are potent and broad spectrum and a very long duration of action, and are part of an ongoing warfare between parasiticides, the drugs used to kill parasites, and the ability of the target organisms to adapt to and become resistant to these drugs, requiring ever more drug development within the pharmaceutical industry. You might be familiar with the current crisis in antibiotics and a similar war against bacteria. Of course, make no mistake, this is often a necessary battle. Bacteria can kill, and external and internal parasites out of control can cause huge distress, illness, and death too in both animals and humans. But in many ways, if you're a parasite or a bacterium or a virus, killing your host or making them sick is not very sensible. since you eventually are going to run out of hosts. Instead, symbiosis and commensality is the ideal neighbourly arrangement where the host and parasite coexist in harmony. And the term parasite therefore begins to sound quite inappropriate. Disease and death only result when these neighbourly relations break down or have never established in the first place. I'll come back to practical parasite ethics in the veterinary clinic shortly, but I want to consider one particular parasite which moves between human and non-human, the kind of spokes parasite, if you like, for all those who live quietly and unobtrusively on us and within us, going about their lives in the way they always have. Good neighbours, not always perfect perhaps, but certainly not neighbours from hell. So my chosen parasite is Taenia saginata, the so-called beef tapeworm, one of a large family, the Taeniids, who've evolved a complex life cycle, which results in the adult tapeworm occupying the gut of the definitive or final host, a human in this case. Now, the life cycles of parasites can be truly astounding in their complexity. And if ever there was a case made for intelligent design, I think it would have to be reflected in these organisms. Compared to some of their more exotic neighbours in cestotaxonomy, the Taeniids live a fairly modest and undemonstrative life. They don't, for example, turn their intermediate hosts mad so that the unfortunate intermediaries behave in weird and outlandish ways, drawing attention to themselves, which in turn attracts the attention of the definitive host and results in the definitive host consuming the wayward intermediary, therefore by allowing the devious parasite to complete its life cycle. The Taeniids are a bit more restrained, a bit more Presbyterian and Scottish, maybe. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to think quite a lot about Taenia with the Edinburgh artist Andrea Rowe. And this worm family has stayed with me and has become the default destination for my thinking when I try to unravel the ethical implications of parasitism and what we should do about it. I tried to think my way into the head of Taenia saginata, the scolex, to give the head its scientific name. And it turns out my Taenia has a very Scottish voice. So in the short statement I'm about to read, there's a kind of Glaswegian flavour to the lingo. Now, at previous BASN meetings, I've been really inspired by Susan Richardson's work, including a writing workshop she did a number of years ago. So this is a writing amateur's attempt to give voice to a tapeworm with a few of the Scottish words there glossed for you. So Taenia saginata's last words. Just call me Tina if it's ony easier. We raw genders together here. My pronoun's they, so it is. My life's been absorbing, but now my number's up. I always aim to avoid harming yous, hurting folk, or the coos, placid beasts that yous eat. Is no what I'm about. We ken this well enough as tapeworms. It's in our genes. We never intend to harm. That's the difference with us. But now I'm hurt, so I am. Mortal hurt. Looking back, my life's been in sections. The grass section, the coo section, and knew that in your gut section, things go run and run. I was a chip off the old block. We all were, all 2,000 of us wee nippers. Pros for the start, we already knew what to do in life. No choice, you see. There was a youthful spell of independent donor seeking greener pasture, but the final destination was aye the same. We're predestined. No escape. It was just a question of getting stuck into your work inside all the while. The food processing business. But it wasn't all tack, tack, tack. It's more subtle than that. It's cozy even. We curry down inside your guts and guy something back, fine-tuning your immune cells, increasing your tolerances. We grow attached to you, Ken. Now, it's all unraveling. I'm finished. I'm poisoned. I'm losing my grip on you, and you're my whole life, so you are. Without you, I'm a goner. Will you mourn me? And this is me speaking now in Queen's English. Here's a queer statistic. We have as many living bacteria as tissue cells in our bodies. So we exist in multi-species entanglements, whether we like it or not. In this room, we're surrounded by other creatures in the seat fabrics, on the floor, in the walls and ceiling spaces, and under our feet. So the entanglements are real and lively. If we could put on some magic glasses or hearing amplification and detect these other life forms around us or close to us, the room would be glowing and vibrating. And with our own resident internal microflora, as well as our parasites, our bodies are certainly glowing on the inside and the outside. Everything is zinging. Ethically, in terms of our responsibilities and obligations to the non-human, it always resolves to a question of sentience. I've no doubt rodents are sentient, but what about Taenia? In the latest updated edition of his classic book, Animal Liberation, Peter Singer says he's more open to the possibility that plants might feel pain, though he says he still considers it very unlikely. It's a huge and unscientific simplification, but it seems to me as if Taenia saginata lies somewhere between plant and animal on the sentience scale. The Taeniids are not vertebrates, of course, but the majority of animals are not vertebrates, just as the majority of vertebrates are not mammals, but fish. It's now known that invertebrate crustaceans, such as lobsters and crabs, are sentient, and as a consequence, both cephalopod mollusks and decapod crustaceans are now written into UK animal welfare guidelines and law and are considered sentient. That happened in 2022. That was a big change in thinking about sentience. When we regard animals such as the octopus, for whom we need to go back literally hundreds of millions of years to find a common ancestor, and study the obvious intelligence of these creatures, it's breathtaking to think that those octopus minds evolved along completely separate lines to our own, yet they're still able to solve puzzles, plan, and execute complex tasks with abilities we recognize as akin to our own. Cestodes like Taenia are not currently included under the sentience umbrella, and with our current state of knowledge and sentience, that seems probably reasonable. It could change, just like it has done for some mollusks and crustaceans. Regardless, there's a beauty in the complexity of Taenia's life cycle and other parasites like them, and there are reasons to feel uneasy about stamping them out wherever they're found, just because they lack what we understand to be sentience. Internal parasites like Taenia often loom large in the human imagination, including the imagination of concerned companion animal owners, influenced by a well-intentioned, responsible pet ownership agenda. That agenda raises the public health risk of parasite life cycles gone wrong, should the parasite end up in the wrong intermediate or final host. There's a rare but particularly unpleasant condition called visceral larval migrans, where the larval form of Toxocara canis, which is a dog roundworm, can end up in the human eye. It's a particular risk for children playing in areas where dog feces are not lifted. The feces aren't immediately effective for humans, but they become so if left on the ground, allowing time for the parasite to develop within. It seems a general feature within parasitology that if an infective form gets into the wrong host, then its life cycle and migration might get perturbed. Unusual symptoms may be caused. In many cases, nothing will happen because many parasites are very highly host-specific. But we're more risk-averse than we used to be when we lived in very close proximity to a wide variety of animals. And if you can stamp out parasites, and if they're not sentient, then why not just be on the safe side? Without them, there's one less thing to worry about. Just as without rats, I maybe need not worry in the middle of the night that myself or my dogs could, if very unlucky, end up with leptospirosis. Maybe one tapeworm or one rat is okay, a kind of resident companion parasite or visiting wild animal neighbor. But if domestic conditions are favorable for them, why wouldn't more move in? It's a hostile world out there. There is, though, another dimension to all of this, which moves beyond the domestic. And this is very recent research, actually, February. A study by Sussex University and Imperial College looked at two commonly used drugs, fipronil and imidacloprid. And these are used in popular spot-on preparations, applied routinely as preventatives to control parasites in dogs and cats. And they found significant residues in human hand washings and wastewater from sewerage works. Levels in the rivers were exceeding the safe levels for wildlife. So these products are quite long-acting, potent neurotoxins, and they're no longer used in outdoor agriculture for that reason. One of the authors, a vet and researcher running a large hospital in Chipping Norton, was quoted on the University of Sussex's website. He said, the study shows conclusively that dog spot-on flea and tick treatments are a major contributor to the demonstrated fipronil and imidacloprid pollution of the UK's rivers. Indeed, when other pathways of these pesticides from pets to waterways are factored in, for example, dogs swimming in rivers, and the contribution of cat spot-on treatments are considered, it's likely that pet flea treatments will turn out to be the main contributor. As much of the current use of these parasiticides for dogs and cats is unnecessary, especially over the winter period, the veterinary profession needs to urgently reconsider its approach to preventative flea control. And this issue is now gaining quite a lot of traction in the veterinary media, and the British Veterinary Association has amended its guidance, avoiding blanket treatment. Taenia saginata is a tapeworm, not a flea, although fleas have an important role in the life cycle of the dog's own tapeworm, Dipylidium caninum. In fact, they're an intermediate host for Dipylidium, so that flea and worm control are closely interwoven, and spot-on preparations are available for worms too. But if these products are leaching into the environment and affecting wild animals, birds, and invertebrates, then we're going to have to rethink our relations with these parasites in a much more holistic way to preserve ecosystem health. That's a very good reason for more tolerance. In my imagined statement, I had Taenia saying that they gave us something back, fine-tuning our immune cells, increasing our tolerances. In fact, there's not at the moment any real hard evidence for that at a physiological level. But we do know that exposure to a wide range of microbes in the environment of children, playing in dirt, in other words, may be important for the development of their immune systems, and that the lack of this may contribute to a rising incidence of childhood and adult allergies. After all, such environmental exposures have been a feature of human evolution written into our DNA. Although commonly assumed to be an engulfed free-living bacterium swallowed by another cell, one argument suggests that the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of all animal cells, was once a parasite who made themselves at home and became a fully integrated part of the animal cell. And without mitochondria, we're not alive. Parasites which we view with disgust and distress might be less damaging than we assume in the steady state of normal host-parasite relationships. In other words, the steady entangled state of good neighborliness where everyone gets on with everyone else, and rethinking such relations may benefit us all with or without sentience. Thank you.
You know what you're doing. Yeah. We see Ruby, who is working for the Architects Climate Action Network Ecology Group. So it's great to have somebody coming from a very different perspective to talk about unavoidant entanglements.
Sorry, I've just left my notes. So yeah, it seems we've got rats present in the room as well as entangledness. So I'm going to be continuing that theme. So I live in one of the many Victorian terraced houses across London. Our home lies on Haringey Ladder, named after its characteristic rungs of parallel streets, and was originally built for the railway construction workers of the Great Northern Main Line at the end of the 19th century. It features many typical construction techniques of its time, with a long tiled entrance hall, suspended timber floor, and stepped section down to the rear garden behind. It's been home to many assemblies of residents ever since, steadily adapted to suit their needs. A garage and side extension to form the sunroom, a loft conversion to sell 2 extra bedrooms to students, a further bedroom added by a rear extension, and a gorgeous timber veranda that captures all of the south-facing sun. It's now on its latest adaptation to become a shared house for 6 30 to 40 somethings, making our way in North London. These are the celebrated adaptations. It's also been shaped by many non-human adaptations over the years. Susie, an unhomed cat, arrived stray on the sunroom roof 6 years ago, finding safety here where unable to elsewhere. A family of foxes often play in our garden at night, play with our garden too, having dug out a home just over the rear fence. And we often joke of the new housemate initiation tests the many non-human residents across species bring. The moths who followed the yellow kitchen lights and feasted on Laura's bakery ingredients, the ants who trace tracks through cricks in the wall, the mice who scuttle under the floors and nest in the soft, warm boiler room. Our least favourite must have been those drain flies. Our house, like much of the British housing stock, is highly porous, full of nooks and crannies, spare rooms and little hidey holes. It makes a great framework for the community we seek as a house share, but it's this porosity and permeability that makes it so valuable for all of the multi-species community. I argue today that whether it is desirable or not, this porosity is necessarily entangled, overlapping and shared with all others. We spent 4 months last year knowingly living entangledly alongside rats. We experienced their arrival in very different ways and attempted a wide variety of spatial and social adaptations in response. One housemate was incredibly scared of them and would do anything to make them go away. Another weirdly confident in his dominance over the new non-human newcomers. I was mainly scared for their welfare, desperately searching for a win-win solution, yet the strength of opposition from others making me feel confined to the basics of life-saving at best. They settled quickly and the house and WhatsApp group became a dedicated battleground. We tried anything we could think of to persuade them to move out, from ultrasonic music rituals to deep cleans and crumb clearance, wire wool in their doorways and makeshift traps. Approaches got increasingly hostile, violent, and murderous as people's patience wore thin. Our loss of power became clearer. We were not winning. The ruts continued to come in, adapting the building fabric and space as they needed to live their lives. They had decided to move in beside us. I think it was time to meet and greet our new neighbours. We have a long and tangled history with rats. They are notoriously over-associated with illness and disease, tarnished with accusations of uncleanliness and hygiene risk. Scapegoats of the Black Death, our histories of the plague are swarmed with demonised rats, yet recent simulations of the spread actually point to the fleas and ticks on humans as the most likely vector. Just the other week, in preparation for this paper, the instant reaction from a friend when I mentioned the topic was, we have to take severe caution to prevent risk of Bale's disease. A very rare, though potentially disabling disease, leprosy can be contracted from contaminated water, soil, or contact with an infected animal, most commonly infecting cattle, pigs, dogs, and rats. Those most at risk from the disease today are actually the workers in intensive agriculture or dog owners, of which that friend is one. I completely agree on the importance of considering risk in multi-species cohabitation. However, our current spatial relationships with rats are exponentially more risky to them than to humans. We experiment upon rats in their masses, intentionally subjecting them to disability via illness, disease, and genetic modification. We implant cancer into lab rats, graft ears onto their backs, pump chemical cosmetics into their eyes, and breed and genetically engineer them for tests of disease. Urban and rural environments alike are laced with bait, traps, and harsh poisons designed to eradicate via slow and painful deaths. They're the most One of the most persecuted species in Western societies, yet they are defiantly prolific. Rumour goes that a Londoner is never further than 6 feet away from a rat. They are highly intelligent, social and empathetic animals with a huge capacity for emotion, learning and connection. They are incredibly successful urban mammals. In fact, I'm sure their very success is exactly why they are feared. Whilst the proliferation of misinformation about rats and alarm warnings of risk to humans necessitates counterpoint, it is disinteresting to me as an argument for my thinking ahead. Regardless of any ecosystemic services an individual supposedly provides for us, the simple fact of their desire to become a neighbour merits them deserving of neighbourly rights and responsibilities. Neither bred and domesticated for our use, like dogs, rabbits, and farmed animals, nor wishing to reject the cosy modern comforts humans create in favour of wildness, liminal species are those who thrive in similar environments to ourselves, seeking warmth, abundant food, and safe, protected spaces to raise a family. Typically neither seeking nor requiring close dependencies with human neighbours, relationships with liminal animals remain closely adjacent and entangled nonetheless. They are our urban neighbours and relations in complex ecosystemic webs. This framing of non-human animals in response to their needs and desires as part of our multi-species communities comes from Sue Donaldson and Will Kemlicker's seminal work, Zoopolis. The political framework they paint for human-animal relations is both visionary and grounded. Making crystal clear the vast injustices the current system imposes, they then proceed to imagine a series of accommodations and adaptations we can make towards the fostering of new relations, rights and responsibilities. Spanning policy, sociology, philosophy and space, the framework they build forms much of my own thinking and imagining, bringing a positive rights-based ethics into my practice as an architect. Architecture with others is a challenge. We increasingly lament the loss of nature in humanized environments, speaking and conceiving of the city in opposition to nature, some kind of barren concrete jungle. In the context of widespread biodiversity loss and ecosystemic collapse, planners and gardeners are asked to feverishly plant up bee-friendly borders, erect bug hotels and ring-fence reserves of wetlands. Biodiversity net gain, ecological enhancement, and nature-based design are now sustainability buzzwords in the architectural industry, with developers keep competing for who has the largest green roof, the best improvement on mental health, the most extravagant monument of idyll. Yet along with this utopic ecology of harmony, pollinators gently humming as they work, useful predators checking populations of prey, and impeccable mental health, there are many tensions that come with a multi-species world of neighbouring. As Melanie Challenger says, sometimes they bite. Rats, I admit, do not make generous housemates. They tend to hang out only when you're not around. They don't have great table manners. They gnaw through the building fabric and nick food out of your cupboards. There are only a couple of bites, leaving a chewed packet spilling across the back. I still miss my favourite jumper, the collateral damage of a makeshift gap plugging beneath my bedroom door. Uninvited neighbouring is inevitable. Life as a social animal is wonderfully full of overlapping affects and effects as we navigate the fluctuating boundary of the individual versus the collective self. Despite our best efforts to contain, noises, smells, stray drinks cans and germs invariably travel and pass between us. Eradication, infestation, elimination, vermin, pests, pest control, disease, poison. All extremely violent terms, and yet they are completely normalized when speaking of rats. Even vegan organizations frequently advise preventing rats from becoming neighbors, building barriers across their entranceways, filling circulation routes with lacerating wire wool, and springing live traps on them mid-meal. We deny them spatial agency, claiming their homes as ours only, forcibly evicting them to a foreign territory or land. Yet increasingly, studies are showing that these methods that focus on removing individual animals are largely ineffective anyway. In which case, let's stop avoiding entangledness and instead design spaces that embrace, celebrate, and safeguard multi-species neighbouring, even with those who bite. As an architect and also as an activist, I am interested in spatial design as a tool to tolerate, accept, and extend care towards those we meet abrasively. I seek a richly nuanced understanding of how and why we shape space in reaction to others. the impacts this has on our behaviour and perceptions, and a creative, reconstructed response to subvert. Yes, we can divide ourselves into isolated nuclear family homes, grow dense box hedges, and install harsh wire meshes into our walls. Yet the more we separate, the more we fear contagion by the other. In her essay on immunity and contagion, Audrone Zujoute reinterprets these medical concepts through a political dimension. Immunization becomes a practice of the protection of the individual, not through isolation, but through a gradated acceptance and incorporation of the community. On balance, there is far more risk in isolation than the selective acceptance of foreign bodies, of embracing, partaking, and exchanging in our multicultural, multi-species communities. I think we need a responsive, fluctuating, and membranous articulation of space. I've come to frame the agency of spatial activism through 3 primary capacities. The first I identify is architecture as a form of physical infrastructure or control. At its most fundamental, architecture is the physical construction that mediates between inside and outside. It distinguishes indoors from outdoors, constructs a barrier to filter heat, light, and rain. It also becomes a boundary against strangers, neighbours, and unruly bodies. Architectural thresholds can be violently impenetrable, lining seats and perches with sharp spikes to prevent arresting and nesting. They can be selectively permeable, a wire mesh that allows some bodies but prevents others, a soft wood that can be gnawed and shaped if required. Equally, they can be an invitation, an infrastructure that provides care, affordances, enables agency. We vary this threshold through a broad spectrum of porosities and permeabilities, designing openings that selectively invite entry, light through angled skylights, microchipped cats through digitally controlled flaps, spiders less intentionally through cracks in walls. Could an activist architecture begin to soften and flex our rigid boundaries, accept and incorporate this perceived contagion of the other? Reconceiving the harsh barrier instead as a responsive membrane, I'm thinking of gnaw-out panels instead of access panels, softer materials where access is rat safe, cozy niches in walls and floors that we're not needing, ready to appropriate by others. Architecture is also a highly cultural production, reflecting the social relationships, values, and norms of its context. A family home designed around Western ideas of cozy domesticity is very different to a shopfront, prioritizing a capitalist self-marketing. Different again is the factory floor, or indeed farm building, designed to maximize production. Different countries, regions, and social norms give rise to different arrangements and vernaculars, becoming symbolic of their culture and place. Our spatial representation reflects our pre-existing ingrained values. Importantly, however, it also shapes our behaviours and reinforces our perceptions of ourselves and others. A large dining table in a sun-drenched room encourages slow, sociable meals. A grand opulent entrance may shout out a queer identity. A cold mattress and limp sleeping bag shapes the hunched figure of the unhomed. Just as the constant labelling of rats as dirty reinforces our belief of risk to health, spatially representing them via poison traps and deterrence reinforces our belief of incompatibility. In our haste to avoid, eliminate, defend against them, we eradicate all space for their family lives, their play, their cleanliness. In blocking their entrances, we instead encourage access via the sewers. In reaction to our preconceived stereotypes, we're designing in exactly the spaces we fear. Designing in spatial activism instead, could our designs celebrate the multi-species home? Perhaps we make little entrance details that nod playfully to their nested homes, leave space for their play. We design to meet these so-called pests in different ways, when they are not screaming and fighting. Finally, we can think of architecture as a facilitator of connections. We can direct and streamline views, channel sounds, contrast generous circulation spaces with tight one-way routes, and step sections to manage scales of intimacy. Whilst we may eagerly wrap up under a shared fluffy blanket with a partner, save money via shared stairwells with other flat owners, the degree of spatial intimacy we are able to accept is highly dependent on risk, desire, and reward. While some relationships become closer through proximity, sometimes they do strengthen through privacy. A widened corridor can make a social niche, a shared entrance store, form a neighbourly exchange. Equally valuable are the bedroom door to recuperate energy, a stepped section to let us hear but not touch. Spatial intimacy is highly specific to the individuals and groups involved, requiring constant communication and negotiation to work out. From such a risk-averse start point with rats, could architecture facilitate improved relationships via a gradual transition in this case? A gradual acceptance of community immunity? Maybe rats could happily pass below suspended floors without any harm to any of us. They may enjoy the crumbs we care not for, make use of the space out of hours when we don't need it. From my neighbours, I expect neither close dependency nor aloof estrangement. I expect transient overlap, varying with time and purpose, distinct, bounded, but permeable, affective. So even when we have bad neighbours, are there not a plethora of options before we get to killing? The truth is, even a vegan architecture cannot design for our neighbours. We are not rats or spiders or even other human individuals. We are simply testing arrangements and seeing what may stick. As Michelle Westerlaken says, design is a process of negotiation possibilities. We offer spatial affordances, they chew and renew. As we slowly learn to accept, then listen, then respond, so spatial negotiation will become a crucial part of multi-species living. An architecture of activism becomes a design toolbox, sliding scales of porosity, invitation, representation, adjacencies and environment. Our world becomes a spatial tapestry to facilitate adaptation by others, rich in variety of materials, textures, sizes, lightness, noisiness. I spent a lot of time and energy during my master's thesis looking for an activist architecture that would create film-worthy, utopic multi-species union, searching for a spatial recipe that would inspire flowering friendships between wasps and humans, convert fishermen into seaweed growers, leave us all skipping off into the sunset in fake leather sandals. But honestly, after I'd got over that existential powerlessness of a single architectural student trying to bring down patriarchal and anthropocentric late capitalism, I mainly got a bit bored by it. Ethics in practice is far more interesting to me now, the nitty-gritty, imperfect, irritating reality of sharing. Utopic neighbourliness doesn't mean every individual necessarily gets their way, nor that we always get on. But in an anti-speciesist community, we give every individual the opportunity to. We celebrate nested homes within homes, soften spaces below suspended floors. Maybe we offer spare crumb exchanges where we can, design porosity through the NORAD panels where safe and feasible. We offer care, respect, and opportunity, even when we don't really want to. In my vegan utopia, it is not reliant on mutual benefits, win-wins, and ecosystem services, but founded in the inherent right to a joyful and thriving life. My utopia now navigates the frictions of risk, irritation, messy housemates, and noisy neighbours. So let's embrace ratty disruptions, eschew, contaminate, and bite open the material constructs that delineate private, collective, and public, neighbour, housemate, and stranger. In embracing the rats, I herein offer a way in for a race of neighbours everywhere. Adopting diverse tapestries of space, responsive membranous separation, and constant renegotiated design, let's drop the hard resistance and remember what spatial justice means. I think we'll all make it just fine, even if we do get a nip sometimes.